Some knowledge is not hidden because anyone wishes it to remain hidden. It is hidden because the world has simply not yet finished the slow, patient work of uncovering it, and in that unfinished space, in the gap between what has been glimpsed and what has been confirmed, an entire mythology of silence tends to grow thick and persistent, wrapping itself around ordinary caution, until caution itself begins to look from a distance like concealment. There are rooms beneath the sand that have not been opened in 3,000 years. There are documents in museum archives that have been read by perhaps a dozen living people. There are questions that serious, careful scholars ask quietly among themselves and answer only with a shrug, because the honest answer in each case is simply that no one yet knows. Tonight, we are going to sit inside that particular gap, the narrow, uncertain space between genuine mystery and the temptation to call every unanswered question a cover-up. We are going to look closely at the discoveries, the restrictions, the sealed archives, and the unresolved anomalies that continue to circle the edges of Egyptology, not to indulge in easy conspiracy, but to understand with real precision why so much of ancient Egypt still resists our full understanding. Even now, even with satellites and cosmic ray imaging and a century and a half of dedicated excavation behind us, picture the Giza Plateau in the gray hour just before dawn, when the last of the desert's nighttime cold still clings to stone, and the Great Pyramids themselves stand as three enormous, geometrically perfect shadows against a sky only just beginning to soften from black to the deep blue-gray of early morning. The wind here moves low across the plateau, carrying fine pale sand that settles, grain by grain, into the seams between limestone blocks that have not moved, structurally speaking, in over 4,000 years, though their outer casing stones, the smooth, polished surface that once made these monuments gleam white and gold in direct sunlight, have long since been stripped away, quarried for later buildings in a Cairo that did not yet exist when these structures were first raised. Security fencing, modern chain link, and somewhat incongruous against the ancient stone it surrounds, marks the boundaries of areas closed to ordinary visitors. Sections of the plateau where excavation is ongoing, or where structural concerns have led Egyptian authorities to restrict access entirely, sometimes for years at a stretch. Near the base of the Great Pyramid, a narrow, unassuming metal door, easy to overlook entirely amid the scale of the surrounding monument, marks one of several access points into the pyramid's interior passages that, even after nearly 2 centuries of dedicated Western exploration and considerably longer than that of local knowledge and access, continue to yield genuine surprises to researchers, using tools their 19th century predecessors could not have imagined. Inside, where electric cabling has long since replaced the smoking torches of earlier explorers, the air remains thick, mineral, and strangely still, the narrow ascending and descending passages requiring a stooped, careful posture that most modern visitors find immediately viscerally humbling, a reminder that these spaces were built for a purpose entirely separate from comfortable, upright human movement. The Grand Gallery, when one finally reaches it, opens upward into a corbelled ceiling of genuinely startling height and precision, cut and fitted by hand with a level of accuracy that continues to draw serious, sober admiration from structural engineers who study it today, an achievement that requires no exotic explanation to be recognized as extraordinary, only an honest reckoning with just how much skill, labor, and organizational sophistication these builders actually possessed. Here is the genuine tension at the center of everything we will discuss this evening, and it is worth stating plainly, because plain statement is considerably rarer in this particular subject than it ought to be. Egyptology possesses an abundance of physical evidence unmatched by almost any other field of ancient historical study. Entire cities of the dead preserved in dry desert conditions, papyrus archives numbering in the tens of thousands of individual documents, monumental architecture that has survived, largely intact, for a span of time longer than most other human civilizations have existed at all. And yet, running directly alongside reasons of preservation, security, or national sovereignty, some imposed by the simple, grinding slowness of academic publication, and some imposed by nothing more sinister than the fact that a great deal of what has already been excavated has simply not yet been studied, catalogued, or translated by the modest number of specialists qualified to do so. This is the distinction we will hold carefully throughout this evening's journey. There is a considerable difference between something being forbidden in the dramatic sense so often implied by that word, and something being restricted, delayed, embargoed, disputed, or simply still unread, sitting in a storage box in a museum basement, waiting for a researcher with the right expertise and the right span of available time to finally open it. Both categories produce genuine mystery. Both categories can feel, to an outside observer, remarkably similar. A locked door is a locked door regardless of what specifically lies behind it. But the reasons behind these closed doors matter enormously to an honest understanding of what we actually know, what we do not yet know, and what may in fact never be fully knowable at all. We begin then, not with rumor, but with structure, with the genuine, well-documented, and often quite bureaucratic reasons why so much of ancient Egypt remains, even today, just beyond our full reach. In November of 2017, an international research collaboration called Scan Pyramids, using a technique borrowed directly from particle physics, announced a discovery that remains, even now, one of the genuinely open and unresolved questions in all of Egyptology, using detectors sensitive to muons, subatomic particles that fall constantly from the upper atmosphere and pass through solid stone in measurable, predictable quantities. The research team identified a previously unknown void within the body of the Great Pyramid itself, positioned directly above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters in length. Its exact shape and orientation still debated among the scientists who discovered it. This was not a rumor, nor a fringe claim circulated on the margins of serious scholarship. The findings were published in the journal Nature, one of the most rigorously reviewed scientific publications in the world, and the muon detection method itself had already been tested and validated in earlier, less dramatic applications, including a similarly designed effort in the 1960s that used the same basic technique to search unsuccessfully for hidden chambers within the Pyramid of Khafre. What makes the 2017 discovery genuinely remarkable is not any wild claim made about its contents. The research team was notably restrained in its own public statements, but the confirmed, replicated existence of a substantial internal space that had gone entirely undetected for well over 4,000 years of continuous human attention to this specific structure. And here is where the honest limitation of our current knowledge becomes genuinely important to sit with. As of the most recent published research, no one has entered this void, no camera has been threaded into it, no artifact, no inscription, no burial good, nothing at all has been recovered from it, because current Egyptian preservation policy, guided by a now well-established international consensus around minimally invasive archaeology, has thus far declined to authorize the kind of drilling or structural intervention that direct physical access would require. This is not concealment in the dramatic sense. It is caution, a genuinely reasonable caution, given the catastrophic and irreversible damage that careless intervention could inflict on a structure that has survived, essentially unaltered, for over 4 millennia. But caution, however reasonable, produces its own particular flavor of unease, because it means that the single most significant new architectural discovery within the Great Pyramid in the modern era remains, for now, a confirmed absence rather than a confirmed answer, a space we know exists, whose dimensions we can measure with genuine scientific precision, and whose actual purpose, contents, and relationship to the rest of the pyramid's internal structure remain entirely, and quite possibly permanently, unknown to anyone currently living. In 1837, the British explorer Richard William Howard Weiss, excavating within the smallest of the 3 Great Pyramids of Giza, discovered a magnificent basalt sarcophagus within the pyramid's lowest burial chamber, ornately carved in a style meant to evoke the paneled facade of an early royal palace. A genuinely significant find representing one of the few royal sarcophagi recovered from the Giza pyramids in anything resembling its original context. Vies arranged for this sarcophagus to be shipped to England, where it was to join the growing Egyptian collections then being assembled in British museums during this particular, aggressively acquisitive era of archaeological practice. The ship carrying it, a merchant vessel named the Beatrice, departed from the Mediterranean in October of 1838, bound for London, and somewhere in the waters near the coast of Spain, in a storm whose details survive only in fragmentary shipping records, the Beatrice sank, taking Menkaur's sarcophagus down with it to a resting place on the ocean floor that has never been definitively located, despite periodic renewed interest from maritime archaeologists in the years since. This loss carries a particular, genuine weight within the history of Egyptology, not because of any hidden conspiracy surrounding its disappearance. The sinking is documented, unremarkable, and entirely explicable as an ordinary maritime accident common to the era's shipping practices, but because of what it represents, a piece of physical evidence already recovered, already documented in careful drawings and descriptions made before its loss, that nonetheless remains permanently inaccessible to any future scholar, no matter how sophisticated our tools eventually become. We know the sarcophagus existed. We have Vies's own sketches and measurements. We do not have the object itself, and in all likelihood, given the passage of nearly 2 centuries, and the genuine difficulty of precisely locating a single shipwreck along a stretch of coastline as heavily trafficked as the Western Mediterranean, we may never recover it at all. A wooden coffin lid, believed on stylistic grounds to be a later addition to Menkaur's original burial, made by priests restoring the tomb many centuries after the king's original interment, survived this same voyage and remains today in the collection of the British Museum, radiocarbon dated in more recent decades to a period considerably later than Menkaur's own reign, complicating rather than clarifying our understanding of exactly how and when this pharaoh's original burial was disturbed, restored, and re-equipped across the many centuries of ancient Egyptian history that followed his death. A genuine puzzle that the loss of the sarcophagus itself has only made more difficult to fully resolve. When Howard Carter discovered the largely intact tomb of Tutankhamun in November of 1922, he and his team faced a task of genuinely unprecedented scale. The careful documentation, conservation, and removal of well over 5,000 individual objects packed into a tomb considerably smaller than had been anticipated for a royal burial, in a state of density and disorder that required years of painstaking, object-by-object recording before the tomb could even be considered fully cleared. Carter died in 1939, 17 years after the discovery, having published only a partial account of his findings, a popular 3-volume narrative intended for a general audience, alongside a considerably more limited set of specialized academic papers addressing specific categories of object. The bulk of his genuinely comprehensive excavation records, thousands of pages of handwritten notes, object cards, and photographic plates, documenting the tomb's contents in exhaustive detail, remained, at the time of his death, almost entirely unpublished, held first in his own private papers and eventually transferred to the archives of the Griffith Institute at Oxford University, where they remain today, carefully preserved and, since the digitization efforts of recent decades, considerably more accessible to researchers than they once were. For much of the 20th century, this incomplete publication record created a genuine and often frustrating gap in Egyptological knowledge, specialists needing to consult specific categories of object, from Tutankhamun's tomb, chariots, textiles, particular categories of jewelry, frequently found themselves working from Carter's original field notes rather than any formal peer-reviewed publication, because no such publication had ever been produced. Entire recent decades have seen considerable progress in closing this gap, dedicated research teams working systematically through Carter's archive, producing at last formal specialist publications on categories of object that had waited, in some cases, more than 70 years for proper scholarly treatment. But even now, some categories of material from this single, famous tomb remain incompletely published, a genuinely sobering reminder that even the most celebrated archaeological discovery of the modern era has not yet been fully, comprehensively shared with the scholarly community that has spent an entire century studying it. In the Egyptian gallery of the British Museum in London stands a slab of dark granodiorite, damaged and incomplete at its edges, bearing a single decree issued by Egyptian priests in 196 before the Common Era, inscribed in 3 separate scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Ancient Greek, a document whose importance lies not primarily in its actual content, a fairly routine piece of priestly and royal administration, but in the fact that its parallel text in a known language, Greek, provided the essential key that allowed the French scholar Jean-François Champollion to finally decipher hieroglyphic writing in 1822, unlocking, after centuries of failed attempts by earlier scholars, the entire textual record of ancient Egyptian civilization. The stone was discovered in 1799 by French soldiers during Napoleon's military campaign in Egypt and passed into British possession in 1801 under the terms of a treaty ending that particular military engagement, arriving in London in 1802, where it has remained with only brief interruptions for wartime safekeeping ever since. This transfer, occurring within the specific and considerably fraught context of European colonial competition over Egyptian antiquities during this era, has become in recent decades the subject of an increasingly public and increasingly pointed diplomatic dispute, with the Egyptian government formally requesting the stone's return on multiple occasions, most recently reiterating this request through official channels in the years following the broader global reckoning with museum collections built substantially through colonial-era acquisition. The British Museum's position, articulated consistently across these various requests, holds that the stone was acquired under the legal terms applicable at the time of its transfer, and that its continued presence in London has, in the museum's own stated view, made an object of genuinely global historical significance accessible to a broader international public than a single national collection could otherwise provide. Egyptian officials and a considerable body of independent international opinion counter that this argument, whatever its individual merits, does not adequately address the underlying question of whether an object of such profound national and cultural significance should remain permanently outside the country whose ancient civilization it directly documents, particularly given that the stone's initial removal occurred not through ordinary purchase or gift, but through the specific mechanisms of colonial-era military conquest. This dispute remains, as of the most recent public statements from both governments, genuinely unresolved, neither side's position undergoing significant public movement in recent years. The stone itself continuing to sit, as it has for well over 2 centuries now, in a glass case in Bloomsbury, viewed by millions of visitors annually, most of whom, understandably, focus on the linguistic marvel the object represents, rather than the ongoing, quietly persistent diplomatic tension surrounding the simple, unresolved question of where, precisely, it actually belongs. In the Neues Museum in Berlin, displayed in careful isolation beneath dramatic, deliberately theatrical lighting, stands a painted limestone and stucco bust depicting the 18th dynasty Queen Nefertiti, discovered in 1912 by a German archaeological team excavating the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose at Amarna, the short-lived capital city built by Nefertiti's husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten, during his radical religious revolution. The bust's arrival in Germany occurred through what was, at the time, a standard practice known as partage, in which foreign excavation teams working in Egypt circumstances of how this particular object came to be classified and divided have themselves become a matter of genuine historical dispute, with some scholars and Egyptian officials arguing, based on surviving correspondence from the period, that the German excavation team may have deliberately understated the bust's artistic significance during the official division process, presenting it in ways calculated to ensure it would be assigned to the German rather than the Egyptian share of the season's finds. Egypt has formally requested the bust's return on multiple occasions since the 1920s, requests that have consistently been declined by the relevant German museum authorities, who maintain that the original partage was conducted according to the legal standards of its era, and that the object's fragile physical condition, layers of paint applied directly over a stucco surface built up on a limestone core, makes any transport, even for temporary loan, a matter of genuine and substantial conservation risk. This particular justification, unlike the broader legal arguments surrounding many other disputed antiquities, carries a distinct technical credibility that even critics of the museum's position generally acknowledge. The bust's physical fragility is not itself contested. Whatever suspicion remains about the original circumstances of its acquisition, the tension surrounding this single object captures something genuinely representative of a much broader pattern across the history of Egyptology, an era of excavation practice governed by legal and ethical standards considerably different from those in place today, producing a present-day landscape scattered with objects whose ownership, whose rightful location, and whose actual legal status remain genuinely contested, not through any active conspiracy of silence, but through the specific, unresolved friction between historical legal practice and contemporary ethical judgment, a friction that shows no clear sign of being fully resolved for any of the individual objects still caught within it. In the Valley of the Queens, across the river from the more famous Valley of the Kings, lies the tomb of Nefertari, principal wife of the pharaoh Ramesses II, decorated with a level of artistic sophistication and color preservation that many specialists consider unmatched anywhere else in Egyptian funerary art. Scenes of the queen accompanied by various deities rendered in a palette of colors, deep blues, warm ochres, a particular vivid yellow that remain even after more than 3,000 years, genuinely vivid to the eye. This same vividness, paradoxically, is precisely what has made the tomb largely inaccessible to the ordinary visiting public for much of the past several decades. Restoration work, undertaken by a joint Egyptian and international conservation team throughout the 1980s, revealed that the tomb's delicate paintings, applied over a plaster surface prone to detaching from the underlying limestone in a process called spalling, were actively deteriorating, a process significantly accelerated by the humidity, carbon dioxide, and simple physical presence introduced by ordinary tourist visitation. Human breath alone, multiplied across the thousands of visitors the tomb had received in its more freely accessible years, was found to be measurably altering the delicate microclimate the paintings had, until that point, survived within for millennia. Egyptian authorities responded by closing the tomb to regular public access following the completion of restoration work in the 1990s, permitting entry only through special, tightly limited, and considerably expensive arrangements, a policy that has remained largely in place with periodic adjustments ever since. This restriction, unlike many of the other limitations we have discussed this evening, involves no dispute over ownership, no diplomatic tension between nations, no genuine scientific mystery about hidden contents. It represents, instead, a stark and fairly universally accepted example of a preservation dilemma that runs through nearly every category of ancient Egyptian discovery. The fact that the very act of human access, of viewing, of breathing the same air these ancient spaces have sealed within themselves for thousands of years, can itself constitute a genuine, measurable threat to the survival of what is being viewed. This creates information anyone is actively concealing, but a physical reality, a room full of extraordinary, irreplaceable color and detail that can only be fully, safely preserved by very deliberately, very consistently, keeping most of the world out of it. A paradox that sits at the heart of nearly every difficult conservation decision the modern custodians of ancient Egypt's physical legacy continue to navigate. No honest examination of this subject can avoid addressing a body of alternative theories that has grown up over the past several decades around ancient Egypt specifically, and around the pyramids of Giza most of all. Theories proposing that the Sphinx shows erosion patterns consistent with a period of prolonged rainfall many thousands of years older than its conventionally accepted construction date, that the pyramids encode astronomical or mathematical knowledge implying contact with a lost, more technologically advanced civilization, or that a hidden chamber, sometimes called a Hall of Records, lies beneath or near the Sphinx, containing lost archives from this same posited earlier civilization. These claims deserve to be addressed directly and honestly, rather than either dismissed with contempt or presented uncritically as equally valid alternatives to the conventional scholarly record. The overwhelming consensus of professional geologists, archaeologists, and Egyptologists, based on multiple independent lines of evidence including quarry marks, construction debris, workers' records, and the consistent, well-documented archaeological context of the surrounding Giza necropolis, places the construction of the Sphinx and the pyramids firmly within the 4th dynasty, roughly the 26th century before the Common Era, a dating supported by a genuinely substantial body of converging physical and textual evidence. The specific claims proposing a much older date, most closely associated with the independent geologist Robert Schoch, rest primarily on an interpretation of erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure walls that Schoch attributes to prolonged rainfall exposure, a climate condition Egypt is not believed to have experienced since a period many thousands of years prior to the 4th dynasty. This specific interpretation has been extensively examined and, by the overwhelming majority of specialists in both geology and Egyptology who have engaged with it directly, found unpersuasive, alternative and more conventional explanations for the same erosion patterns involving wind, groundwater, and the specific properties of the local limestone having been proposed and generally accepted as considerably more consistent with the full body of surrounding evidence. It is worth noting, honestly and without dismissiveness, that no physical evidence of the proposed Hall of Records has ever been found, despite considerable dedicated search, including surveys using ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography conducted specifically to test this hypothesis. This absence of evidence does not, on its own, definitively prove the chamber does not exist. Absence of evidence is not, in strict logical terms, evidence of absence, but it does mean that the claim currently rests on inference and interpretation, rather than on any confirmed physical discovery, a genuinely important distinction to hold on to amid the considerable enthusiasm this particular theory continues to generate in popular culture. The honest position, the position most consistent with the actual state of the evidence, is neither triumphant dismissal nor credulous acceptance, but a patient, genuinely open acknowledgement that this specific question remains testable, and that further investigation, conducted carefully and transparently, could in principle resolve it more definitively than it currently has been resolved. Beneath the main galleries of the Old Egyptian Museum in Cairo's Tahrir Square, a building whose ornate, faded pink facade has watched over the square through more than a century of Egyptian political history, lie storage basements containing, according to museum staff who have spoken publicly on the matter over the years, an estimated 100,000 or more individual artifacts never placed on public display, many of them never fully catalogued, some, according to several credible published accounts, essentially unexamined since the day they were first brought in from the field decades, or, in some cases, over a century ago. This situation arose not through any deliberate policy of concealment, but through the simple, compounding mathematics of more than a century and a half of continuous excavation across a country with an extraordinarily rich archaeological record combined with chronic underfunding, understaffing, and, at various points across the 20th century, significant political instability that made sustained, well-resourced curatorial work genuinely difficult to maintain. Objects arrived from field excavations across the decades faster than the museum's available staff could properly process them, and once placed in storage, awaiting eventual cataloging, many simply remained there year after year as new arrivals continued to compound the existing backlog. The opening of the considerably larger Grand Egyptian Museum near the Giza Plateau, a facility years in construction and specifically designed with dramatically expanded modern storage and conservation capacity, has begun in recent years to address this situation directly, with dedicated teams working systematically through the older museum's basement holdings as part of the broader transfer of collections to the new facility. This represents a genuine, ongoing, and actively funded effort to resolve exactly the kind of institutional backlog we are describing. Evidence that this particular category of unstudied material reflects practical historical limitation rather than any active desire to keep specific objects from scholarly or public attention. And yet the sheer scale of what remains to be properly examined means that even with this renewed institutional effort, individual researchers who have been granted access to work through specific sections of this backlog continue to report genuine, previously unrecorded discoveries, minor inscriptions, unusual object types, occasional pieces that shift in small but genuine ways, scholarly understanding of specific historical periods emerging not from any new excavation in the Egyptian desert, but simply from finally, carefully opening boxes that have sat quietly on a shelf for the better part of a century, waiting for someone with the right expertise and the right allotment of institutional time to finally take a proper look inside. Not every limitation on archaeological access in Egypt arises from questions of preservation or academic backlog. Some arise from genuine, ongoing security concerns, and nowhere is this more evident than across substantial portions of the Sinai Peninsula, a region of considerable ancient historical significance, containing turquoise mining sites worked by ancient Egyptian expeditions, ancient fortress systems guarding Egypt's eastern frontier, and rock inscriptions recording some of the earliest known experiments with alphabetic writing anywhere in the world, but which has also been, across various periods of the past half-century, subject to significant military restriction due to its position as a genuinely sensitive border and security zone. Archaeological work in portions of this region has, at various points, been suspended, delayed, or conducted under considerably more restricted conditions than research teams would typically prefer, not due to any interest in the archaeological material itself, but due to the entirely separate and considerably more pressing security concerns that a strategically sensitive border region genuinely presents to the government responsible for it. Researchers who have worked in this area describe a process of navigating military coordination, restricted zones, and periodically shifting access permissions that adds genuine, practical complexity to an already challenging field of study. Complexity that has, at times, meant certain known archaeological sites in the region have gone years or even decades without renewed scholarly attention, not because their contents are considered sensitive, but because the surrounding land itself is. This particular category of restriction illustrates something worth holding on to carefully, that the practical experience of encountering a closed door in Egyptological research can feel, from the outside, remarkably uniform, a barrier, a delay, a frustrating absence of access, regardless of whether the underlying reason involves genuine national security, straightforward conservation science, institutional underfunding, or ongoing diplomatic dispute. The uniformity of that experience, the closed door feeling, essentially the same, regardless regardless of what specifically lies behind it, is very likely a significant part of why popular imagination has, over the decades, tended to collapse these genuinely distinct categories of limitation into a single, more dramatic narrative of deliberate coordinated concealment, when the actual, considerably less cinematic reality is a patchwork of separate, largely unconnected, practical constraints, each with its own specific and generally quite explicable history. Since 2007, an ongoing research initiative involving Egyptian scientists alongside international genetic specialists has conducted DNA analysis on a number of royal mummies held in Egyptian collections, including the mummy of Tutankhamun and several individuals believed, based on both genetic and physical evidence, to represent his immediate family, work that has produced genuinely significant findings regarding familial relationships within the late 18th dynasty royal line. Findings that have, in turn, generated their own considerable scholarly debate. The genetic evidence gathered through this research supports the conclusion, long suspected on other grounds by Egyptologists studying the physical and textual record of this period, that close-kin marriage, including unions between siblings, occurred within this specific royal family, a practice with clear precedent in ancient Egyptian royal tradition, understood within its own cultural and religious context as reinforcing the divine, semi-sacred status the royal family claimed for itself, though one that modern genetic science recognizes as carrying meaningfully elevated risk of certain inherited health conditions, a factor some researchers have proposed as a contributing element in the notably fragile health and unusually young death of Tutankhamun himself. The full genetic data from this research program has not, as of the most recent published accounts, been made comprehensively available to the wider international research community in the same open, fully accessible format that has become increasingly standard in other areas of ancient DNA research over the past decade, a limitation that a number of independent geneticists working in adjacent fields have publicly noted with some frustration, arguing that broader access would allow additional, independently verified analysis to further refine or challenge the specific conclusions the original research team has published. Egyptian authorities overseeing this research have cited both the sensitivity surrounding the remains of royal individuals and ongoing institutional control over a body of research still considered actively developing as reasons for this more limited release of underlying data. This creates a genuinely interesting and, in its own way, quietly significant category of restricted knowledge, findings that have been published in general form in respected scientific journals and are therefore not secret in any meaningful sense, but whose full underlying evidentiary basis remains available to only a limited circle of researchers directly involved in the original project, leaving the broader scientific community in the position of trusting published conclusions they cannot yet fully independently verify against the complete underlying dataset, a situation not unique to Egyptology by any means, but one that carries particular weight given the genuine historical significance of the specific individuals whose genetic history is at stake. Among the genuine unresolved mysteries of Egyptian archaeology, few have consumed as much dedicated searching across so many decades with so little confirmed result as the search for the final resting place of Alexander the Great, who died in Babylon in 323 before the Common Era, but whose body, according to multiple ancient sources, was eventually transported to Egypt and interred at various points across subsequent centuries, first in Memphis and later in Alexandria, the city he had founded, and that continued to bear his name. Ancient sources describe this tomb as a genuinely significant site of pilgrimage and veneration for several centuries, visited by later Roman emperors, including Augustus, who is recorded as having viewed the preserved body directly, and Caligula, who reportedly removed the breastplate from the tomb to wear himself, and then, at some point during the turbulent later centuries of Roman and early Byzantine rule over Egypt, precise references to the gradual urban redevelopment, burying the site beneath later construction, or simple, accumulated administrative neglect across a period of considerable political instability, never explicitly recorded by any surviving source. Dozens of serious archaeological expeditions, conducted across more than a century of modern excavation within the dense, continuously inhabited urban fabric of modern Alexandria, have searched for this tomb, examining candidate sites beneath mosques, churches, and modern buildings, occasionally generating brief, considerable public excitement around a promising new lead, none of which has, to date, produced confirmed physical evidence of the tomb itself. This represents, in its own particular way, one of the most genuinely frustrating categories of historical silence we have discussed this evening. Not a case of restricted access to a known location, nor a case of unpublished but existing archive material, but the far more fundamental uncertainty of not knowing with any real confidence precisely where to look at all, the object of the search having potentially been lost, not through any single dramatic event, but through the slow, compounding accumulation of nearly 2,000 years of continuous urban habitation, directly atop whatever ancient remains might still, somewhere, survive. Archaeologists who have dedicated significant portions of their careers to this particular search describe an experience that carries its own distinct psychological texture, a genuine, sustained hope calibrated against genuine, accumulated disappointment. Each new excavation season approached with real professional rigor and real personal investment, and each one, so far, concluding without the confirmation that would finally resolve a question that has now remained genuinely open for the better part of 2,000 years, a silence considerably older, in its own way, than almost any other unresolved mystery this evening has touched upon. It is worth pausing, before we bring this evening's exploration toward its close, on a structural feature of Egyptology that shapes nearly everything we have discussed tonight, though it rarely receives the same dramatic attention as any single discovery or dispute. The formal system, established and refined across decades by the Egyptian government's Antiquities Authority, governing who is permitted to excavate where, under what conditions, and with what obligations regarding publication, artifact retention, and ongoing site management. Following a long historical period, stretching from the early 19th century through much of the 20th, during which foreign excavation teams, operating under considerably more permissive legal frameworks than exist today, removed a very substantial portion of Egypt's most significant archaeological finds to museums across Europe and North America. The Egyptian state has, across the decades since gaining full independent control over its own antiquities policy, established an increasingly rigorous system of permits, oversight, and mandatory local partnership governing all archaeological activity within its borders. Foreign research teams today work only in formal partnership with Egyptian institutions under permits that specify, often in very considerable detail, the exact scope of permitted excavation, the handling and eventual disposition of any recovered artifacts, and firm obligations regarding the timely publication of findings. This system, whatever specific frustrations individual researchers have occasionally expressed regarding its bureaucratic complexity, or the sometimes lengthy permit approval timelines it involves, represents a genuinely significant and broadly positive evolution in how archaeological work is conducted, ensuring that Egypt's own institutions and scholars maintain meaningful control over research conducted on their own national heritage. A corrective, however imperfect in its practical execution, to the considerably more one-sided arrangements of the colonial and early independence eras, but it also means that access to specific sites, specific archives, and specific research opportunities is genuinely gated behind an institutional process that can feel, to outside observers unfamiliar with its actual workings, opaque or arbitrarily restrictive when the underlying intention, articulated consistently by Egyptian antiquities officials across recent decades, is the protection and appropriate stewardship of tension between international scholarly interest and a nation's own considered, evolving judgment about how best to protect and share the physical remains of its own extraordinarily long and extraordinarily significant history. No account of Egypt's supposedly forbidden or suppressed knowledge would be complete without addressing, directly and honestly, the popular legend of the so-called curse of the pharaohs. The widespread belief, still repeated frequently in popular culture, that the tomb of Tutankhamun carried an inscribed warning threatening death to anyone who disturbed it, a warning subsequently fulfilled, according to legend, by the sudden death of the excavation's financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, within months of the tomb's opening. The historical record on this specific point is genuinely, thoroughly clear, and worth stating plainly. No such curse inscription was ever found within Tutankhamun's tomb. No contemporary member of Howard Carter's excavation team recorded any such text, and no subsequent careful re-examination of the tomb's actual inscriptions, all of which have been extensively photographed, translated, and published over the past century, has ever identified anything resembling the specific curse language that popular legend attributes to the discovery. The legend appears to have originated primarily through sensationalized press coverage at the time of the discovery, amplified considerably by the genuine, if statistically unremarkable, coincidence of Lord Carnarvon's death from an infected mosquito bite several months after the tomb's opening, a death that journalists of the era, working within a media culture that found the story of an ancient curse considerably more compelling than the mundane reality of an infected wound in an already unwell man, seized upon and repeated with steadily escalating embellishment. Actuarial analysis conducted decades later, examining the actual lifespans of the individuals present at the tomb's opening, found no statistically significant pattern of early death among this group compared to the general population of similar age and background, a finding that has done relatively little, it must be said, to slow the legend's continued circulation in popular media even now, more than a century after the events it claims to describe. This particular case is worth including in an evening otherwise focused on genuine, well-documented mysteries and restrictions, precisely because it illustrates with unusual clarity how easily the honest, considerably more mundane categories of limitation we have discussed tonight, institutional backlog, diplomatic dispute, preservation science, ongoing scholarly publication, can become absorbed into a much more dramatic, much less accurate popular narrative of ancient, forbidden knowledge and supernatural consequence. A narrative that persists not because any genuine evidence supports it, but because it is, on some basic human level, simply a more satisfying story than the true one. Beneath the desert sands at Saqqara lies a long, dim underground gallery known as the Serapeum, carved to house the mummified remains of the Apis bulls, animals worshipped throughout much of Egyptian history as living manifestations of the god Ptah, each bull, upon its death, embalmed with the same elaborate ritual care given to a human pharaoh, and interred within one of a series of massive granite sarcophagi, some weighing more than 60 tons apiece, arranged in niches carved directly into the bedrock along a corridor that extends in total well over 100 meters beneath the surface. When the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette rediscovered this site in 1851, guided by a fragmentary reference in the writings of the ancient historian Strabo, he found the majority of the sarcophagi already opened and looted in antiquity, their contents disturbed centuries or even millennia before his own arrival. But one sarcophagus, sealed within a chamber whose entrance had remained undisturbed, was found still closed, its heavy lid never removed, and Mariette's own account of the moment describes a floor still bearing the undisturbed footprints of the workers who had sealed the chamber over 3,000 years earlier, footprints preserved in a thin layer of dust that had settled, untouched, across the entire span of human history between that final sealing and Mariette's own careful reopening of the space. This particular detail, person had entered carries its own genuinely striking, quietly vertiginous quality, a direct physical trace of a specific human act, a worker turning to leave a sealed room for what he assumed would be the last time anyone ever entered it, preserved with a clarity that makes the intervening centuries feel, for one disorienting moment, almost collapsible, almost close enough to touch. Several side chambers within the broader Serapeum complex remain, even today, only partially explored, their full extent and contents not entirely mapped. A combination of structural instability, ongoing conservation priorities elsewhere at the sprawling Saqqara necropolis, and the sheer scale of unexcavated material still present across this single archaeological zone, meaning that the Serapeum, discovered and partially cleared more than a century and a half ago, has still not yielded the entirety of what it likely contains, a slow, patient, still unfinished excavation, resting quietly beneath one of the most thoroughly studied archaeological landscapes on the entire planet. Ancient Egyptian temples, according to a considerable body of surviving textual reference, maintained institutions the Egyptians themselves called the House of Life, a term referring to specialized scriptoria attached to major temple complexes, where scribes trained, copied sacred and medical texts, composed new ritual literature, and maintained what were, by every surviving indication, substantial archives of religious, astronomical, and medical knowledge accumulated across many centuries of continuous institutional operation. Not one of these libraries has survived intact to the present day. We know of their existence primarily through references made to them in other surviving texts, temple inscriptions describing scribes trained within a specific house of life, papyrus fragments explicitly identifying themselves as copies of texts held within one, and the physical remains of a small number of temple rooms identified through inscription or architectural context as having served the specific archival function, rooms that, without exception, were found essentially empty by the time modern archaeology arrived to examine them, their original papyrus contents lost to fire, flood, insect damage, deliberate destruction during periods of religious upheaval, or simply the ordinary accumulated decay that unprotected organic material experiences across thousands of years. Regardless of how carefully it may once have been stored, the scale of this loss is genuinely difficult to overstate. The famous Edwin Smith and Ebers medical papyri, along with a considerably smaller number of other surviving medical texts recovered from across Egyptian history, are understood by specialists in the field to represent only the barest fragment of what must have been a considerably larger, more comprehensive body of ancient Egyptian medical, astronomical, and religious scholarship, the great majority of which simply no longer exists in any form. Its contents, whatever specific knowledge or observation it once contained, lost entirely and irrecoverably somewhere in the intervening centuries. This particular category of loss differs meaningfully from nearly everything else discussed this evening because it involves no closed door that might, in principle, someday be opened, no restricted archive that could eventually be published, no diplomatic dispute that could eventually be resolved. The House of Life libraries are not hidden. They are gone in the most complete and final sense that phrase can carry, and what we are left with, scattered fragments and second-hand references scattered across the surviving textual record, represents not a mystery awaiting solution but a genuine, permanent absence, a body of ancient human knowledge that existed once, clearly and substantially, and that the world will now, in all likelihood, never recover in any meaningful portion at all. Among the more persistently contested questions surrounding ancient Egypt, one concerns not any specific artifact or sealed chamber, but a broader, more abstract question that has generated genuine, sustained academic disagreement across multiple generations of scholarship. The question of how the ancient Egyptian population related biologically and culturally to other populations of ancient Africa, the ancient Near East, and the broader Mediterranean world, a question entangled often uncomfortably with the specific describe their own identity. The available physical evidence, including the substantial body of ancient DNA analysis conducted in recent decades on mummified remains, alongside skeletal, artistic, and textual evidence, points toward a population with genuine biological continuity to other populations of northeastern Africa, shaped over millennia by Egypt's specific geographic position as a crossroads of trade, migration, and cultural exchange connecting the African continent, the Near East, and the Mediterranean world, a population whose own textual and artistic record shows clear awareness of, and clear cultural distinction from, neighboring populations to the south in Nubia and to the east across the Sinai, without mapping cleanly onto any of the racial categories that later societies would go on to construct and apply, often retroactively, and often for their own specific political purposes, when describing ancient Egyptian civilization. This is a genuinely active area of ongoing scholarly research, continually refined by new genetic studies and new archaeological evidence, and honest engagement with it requires resisting the temptation, common on multiple sides of this particular public debate, to force a complex, still developing scientific picture into whichever simplified, politically convenient narrative a given commentator might prefer. The most careful, current scholarship treats ancient Egyptian identity as a genuinely African civilization, geographically, culturally, and biologically continuous with its African context, while also resisting anachronistic attempts to impose modern racial frameworks developed centuries later in entirely different historical circumstances onto a society that understood and organized its own sense of identity through entirely different categories, primarily geographic, cultural, and political, rather than through anything resembling the racial classifications that later became central to categorizing human populations. We have moved across this evening through a genuinely wide range of limitation and mystery, a confirmed physical void within the Great Pyramid whose contents remain entirely unknown, a royal sarcophagus lost to the seafloor and likely never to be recovered, an archive of excavation records that took the better part of a century to even begin properly publishing, diplomatic disputes over ownership that show no sign of near-term resolution, a tomb so beautiful that its own beauty requires it to remain largely closed to the eyes that might wish to see it, fringe theories tested honestly and found, so far, wanting a museum basement holding perhaps 100,000 objects still waiting for careful attention, a border region where security concerns and archaeological curiosity exist in ongoing, practical tension, genetic data published in careful summary but not yet shared in full, a conqueror's tomb lost somewhere beneath 2,000 years of continuous urban life, an entire modern permitting system built to correct the imbalances of an earlier, less equitable era, and a curse that never actually existed at all. However persistently it continues to be repeated. What connects all of this, I think, is not any single unified conspiracy, and not any single unified mystery either, but rather a pattern worth sitting with quietly, that human knowledge of the deep past is always necessary, partial, always shaped by what has survived, by what has been found, by what has been properly studied, by what current technology allows us to detect without damaging what we are trying to understand, and by the genuinely difficult ongoing negotiations between nations, institutions, and individual researchers about how best to balance the world's evident hunger to know more against the equally legitimate need to protect, preserve, and respect the specific cultural heritage of the specific nation whose ancestors actually created it. The Giza Plateau, as this long night finally draws toward its own quiet close, remains exactly as it has been for over 4,000 years, three great shadows against a slowly lightening sky, a confirmed, measured void suspended somewhere within the largest of them, its contents unknown, perhaps unknowable, at least for now, a scattering of restricted archives, contested objects, and unstudied storerooms extending outward from this single ancient site across museums and institutions on every inhabited continent, each holding its own this civilization. Closer, in fact, than we are to the remains of almost any other ancient culture on Earth. And yet the full, complete understanding that closeness seems to promise remains, even now, even after 2 centuries of dedicated, increasingly sophisticated scholarship, genuinely, persistently out of reach, not because anyone has forbidden us from reaching it, but because the past, by its very nature, only ever gives itself back to us in fragments, and some of those fragments, whether sealed behind stone, sunk beneath the sea, sitting quietly uncatalogued in a basement, or simply lost beneath 2,000 years of a living, breathing, continuously rebuilding city, may simply never be returned to us at all. What then do we make of a civilization that continues, even now, to hold so much of itself just beyond our reach, not through any deliberate act of concealment, but through the sheer, patient weight of time itself, still deciding, one grain of sand at a time, exactly how much of its